Welcome to the Healers Café, conversations on health and healing with Manon Bolliger, a retired and deregistered naturopathic physician with 30 plus years of experience. Here you will discover engaging and informative conversations between experienced healers, covering all aspects of healing, the personal journey, the journey of the practitioner, and the amazing possibilities for our own body and spirit.
So welcome to the Healers Café. I'm here today with Dr. Laura. Her last name is actually Brown, but everyone knows her as Dr. Laura, and she's a registered naturopathic doctor with a functional medicine approach. And she recognizes patterns, removes obstacles, and stimulates the body's natural mechanisms to repair damage and rebuild health. And she's the owner of South End Natural Medicine. She's a best-selling author of Beyond Digestion, a HeartMath certified practitioner, and a level 2 certified gluten-free practitioner. And then also you have Adapt, which is a trained practitioner from the Kresser Institute, which, so let's talk about all that. And first, welcome. And how did your journey into all of this begin?
Oh, thanks, Manon. So I was excited to meet you today. And I know many colleagues when I was going to school had mentioned your name. So you're infamous. And here we are. I get the chance to have a chat with you. So thank you very much for the invitation. How did I end up here? Well, this is my second career, naturopathic medicine. I've been in practice since 2014. So it's really, really quite young for me, but it's something that was always knocking at my door. And, those things, you can't ignore them. So, so when my kids went off to university, I went back to school and here I am. And in the last, I guess it was February 2021 that I released my first book, Beyond Digestion. So it's essentially, I'll just show you, it looks like this. So I had fun writing that. Again, it was one of those things that knocked at your door or knocked at my door, and it was, Laura, you need to write a book. And I was like, oh, I don't know, what am I going to write about, first of all, and how do I write a book? So anyways, that all came about, and digestion is something that I've had issues with, and a lot of patients. Obviously, you start to attract these things into your practice, as you know. So this book is about my story, about how gut health connects to your mind, body, and soul, but also about the stories of many of my patients, and for people that I can't reach, because obviously when we're practicing in provinces, we're generally kind of tied to being in our province. So this helps me reach out and have conversations like this so that we can expand on it. Yes.
Great. So curiosity, what were you before you decided to study when your kids were in school?
I was in technology, and I think my last post was a senior account executive with Microsoft Business Solutions. So I was making solutions for large corporations with customizable software, and always creating solutions and looking at the whole. So that is, and I spent a little time in the learning industry as well. Again, looking at their 5-year plan and where their gaps are, and a little bit to do with that as well. So always looking at that whole picture and then figuring out, what is the root cause of what's going on and what's the solution to get us to where we need to go, which is so congruent with what we're doing in naturopathic medicine, but on an individual basis. And really, everything is made up of individuals, and if individuals aren't healthy, neither is the grander macrocosm. So I just kind of went down into the microcosm a little bit to see what I could do. And it feels really good because I love sciences. It's much more true to my heart.
Yeah. Well, I often find that, it's either one's own history, something that, you either wanted to solve medically for yourself because you couldn't find solutions, or it's kind of a way of looking at the world, that lends itself really well to and to the new industry of being a naturopath, so I can see how that ties in quite well, because you do need to look at the whole. And you specialize really though in gut health, which doesn't mean you don't look at the whole, because you've got to look at the whole person to figure out what's going on with their gut anyways. But so can you tell me a little bit more about how and why that became sort of the focus? And with functional medicine as well, there's lots of tests to see what's going on. So how did that become your interest level?
Well, I've always had issues with digestion, and I think I learned more about it, as I aged. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of fitness competitions, and when I'd prepare, I'd always feel so much better, and that meant, a pretty simple diet of just lots of fresh vegetables and, fish and some lean meat. In those days, there was not a lot of fat, which probably wasn't so good, but it wasn't breads and pastas and gluten and, in particular. But then I'd go back to kind of eating normal after competitions, and then I'd be like, why do I feel so bad? And when I went off to university the first time, I had a lot of brain fog and issues focusing and concentrating, and I just couldn't figure it out. But every time I'd go back to that simple diet, I felt so much better, my brain so much clearer, and I could focus. And I'm like, oh, what is this? And this was years ago, and before anybody ever would talk about anything. And celiac disease was hardly ever mentioned. I mean, it's typically like 1% of the population. So who's even thinking of non-celiac wheat sensitivity? But I was a bit of a canary in the mine that way. And, it wasn't just the brain, it was skin. I had skin rashes, things going on, issues with fertility, issues with my thyroid. So there was a lot of things brewing. And I wasn't getting the answers from the practitioners that I was going to see. They helped me a lot, but I didn't quite get there. And so it was always a bit of a quest to kind of figure things out. So when I had the opportunity to come back to my sciences and to delve into naturopathic medicine, it really helped me understand how things work. And then when, I'm always curious about how we're knit together. But as the microbiome analysis and research started to explode in the last 5 years, I would say particularly, it was like, wow, now it was like full steam ahead, and we're just learning so much. And I learned something every single day about how things are connected and how the gut is connected to the rest of the health. And as I was saying to you earlier, like if I get stumped on a case, I usually have this little voice in the back of my head just kind of saying, Laura, the gut, come on, we got it. What's going on in the gut? Because everything, all the health starts in the gut. Hippocrates said that 2,400 years ago. It all starts in the gut, and I don't really think much has changed since then. He's probably smarter than we ever give him credit for. He's the father of medicine, but my goodness, there's a lot going on. So a lot we can do.
Yeah. And as I was saying, it's funny when you said that, because it's true, the gut is everything. But what probably wasn't as prominent then is, what about the nervous system? What about the vagus nerve? What about how we're able to digest our foods? Because it's not just what you eat, it's the context of which also you're eating it in, the whole nervous system, that is high strung and oversympathetic. And, at least that's my experience in when I was in practice. So comments on that. How are you seeing all of this?
Absolutely. I mean, we have run in the last, I would say, probably 70 years, the world has been in a go state. And it wasn't until we actually, were brought to our knees in the last few years and things started to slow down a little bit before they started to speed back up again, that a lot of people really realized how exhausted they really were and how much they were pushing things. Yes, digestion. I mean, we need rest and digest. If we're always in fight or flight, or freeze, right? We're not digesting. So, and I argue that we not only have to digest our food, we have to digest the world around us.
Yes.
And that includes emotions and dealing with other people. And if we're, if we're not in that, as you said, parasympathetic state, or in that rest and digest state, not only are we not digesting our food, we're not digesting the world around us. Everything is such overwhelm. So it's little wonder. And we often account stress, okay, stress puts us in that fight or flight, but we know stress alone can disrupt and reduce the amount of diversity of our microbiome, just stress alone.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
incredible.
And I was just picturing somebody eating, a perfectly balanced to their, to what's good for them diet. And at the same time, they're having a flow of thoughts about everything going on in the world. And they're not even chewing their food. They're not even present to the moment that they're actually experiencing eating the foods that are good for them. Right. And then you wonder, well, was all that food, like, sure, the food didn't harm them, but did it do all that the food could do? If we actually sat down, took the time to enjoy the meal, ideally to make the meal,
Yes,
what's in the ingredients.
It's so true. I mean, our digestion doesn't start when the food hits our stomach. It starts literally with thinking about it. What are we going to eat for dinner tonight? Okay, and then shopping for it, and then preparing it and cooking it and enjoying it, and just appreciating the textures and the colors and the aromas, and just how things change and commingle together. This is all part of it. And then having some social aspect to it, so that you can enjoy it with others. Because I always say, like, the secret ingredient is love, and you've got to put love into your cooking or into your meal preparation. And I mean, we're living in a time when we have, a lot of two-income houses, and it's difficult to be, doing all those lovely things that I just mentioned. But at least you could add your own personal touch. You could buy some prepared and, fresh ingredients that you could bring home and throw in a pot, and just give it some love while you're pulling the meal together. Or in some cases, I encourage, doing a cook up once or twice a week, stocking that fridge with, your Lego blocks of colors and varieties of things. And then you just mix and match and pull out, and then you're just warming up in a lovely pot, and you're not having to eat the same thing every night, but you're able to mix and match and at least have some good things.
Yeah. No, I think the context is huge. But so let's go a little bit into gluten. And maybe,
Sure.
because I actually haven't really had an interview about gluten particularly, and why it's a problem, maybe in everyone, but certainly in some people very much so. So what can you share with us?
It's a really good question, because I mean, I'm gluten sensitive, as I mentioned, but I don't think everybody is as sensitive as, as everyone else. About 1% of the population, and it's growing. It could be up to 3 to 5%. I'd have to check the latest stats, because it's been a little bit are celiac, but there are so many others who are non-celiac gluten sensitive. And why this is growing is a curious thing. We don't have all of the answers. Is it the genetically modified? Is it the pesticides and the herbicides? What's going on? Is it the stress that we're not able to digest it? But we just don't have all the answers. And I don't think there's one particular answer that is just like, this is why. But, we didn't have this issue digesting things years ago. It wasn't the case. And I don't think it's just that we're noticing it more now, so that now the numbers are higher. Yes, that's part of it. But I also think that there is something going on environmentally that is contributing. Nobody has the digestive enzymes to break down gluten. That's a fact. That's, it's a grain that, and a fiber that we take in, and it bypasses and goes down into the large intestine, where it's fermented. And that's why it's such a good prebiotic. It's fermented and helps feed. But on the way down, for those of us who are sensitive, it can damage, the areas in the tracts and in the ducts, up into by the gallbladder and the pancreas, kind of those areas there, in the liver. And then it can also damage in the small intestine, as we know, the villi in the small intestine. And for those who are sensitive, it takes about 5 hours for that to repair itself. And usually then it's kind of time for the next meal. Okay. For those who are not sensitive, they might repair in like 20 minutes. So it's not as big of an issue. But those who are constantly, putting the gluten down there, every meal, and perhaps we're eating more of it now. And you have to think, right, we are eating more of it now because it's so much more pervasive in the fast food industry. Bread is so much there. And then all of the sweet treats, the donuts and the pastries, and gluten is used in so many processed foods for flavor and for consistency. So it's everywhere. I've even, seen it in the most conspicuous places, like coatings on nuts and things like that should be gluten-free, but naturally, but even though it looks like it, they have a wheat coating on them. And that just doesn't fly, right? And it's having to check all and mustard flours. 9 out of 10 mustards on the shelf will have gluten in them. So it's checking things that you wouldn't normally think of if you're extra sensitive. Mm-hmm. So I think because potentially, in addition to those other things I mentioned, if we're just getting so much of it, and it's causing that constant damage that we're just not getting a chance to heal. So maybe maybe our whole villi aren't completely flattened like they are in celiac disease, but maybe they're just damaged enough to make things not absorb well.
Manon Bolliger here, and I want to thank you for taking actionable steps towards engaging your healing journey and helping others discover their path by watching, sharing, subscribing, and reviewing these podcasts. Every review and share helps spread the word, these different perspectives and choices and options for healing. And to thank you, I'd like to invite you to sign up to my free 7-sequence email tips on health and healing for everyday life. You can go to healerscafe.com tips. Thanks so much.
Or not feel well, have that low-grade nausea. But gluten doesn't always just affect the gut. It actually affects the brain 6 times more than the gut. 6 times more than the gut. It's not always a bellyache.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I knew that, but I didn't know that. I mean, I don't, it's true, because I was saying, what do you normally see people, is it, if they're not sure that they're sensitive, some, like I know lots of people who say, oh yeah, I'm not taking, any wheat these days, because I'm off gluten. And it's like, okay, and then, but they don't know why. Like it's like, it's because it's the right thing to do, because maybe it'll help, so when you can identify if you are sensitive, what gluten actually does, usually, like you said, it's brain fog. It's more on that level that people see the symptoms. Is that correct in your practice too?
Absolutely. And if you want to mix neurological stuff, because I know nervous system and you love it. I'll tell a brief story about one of my patients, and he was about 70 years old, a retired nurse, like a surgical nurse. So pretty bright guy, but he can hardly form a sentence when he struggles to walk in with a cane. He comes with his wife, and his wife has to do most of the talking. So we go through everything. He'd had a mild stroke a couple of years ago, so they thought that was a good explanation for some of the decline that he was experiencing. But as we got further into conversation, I found out that his daughters have celiac, and I'm just like, okay, this is a genetic familial thing. Have you ever been tested? Oh no, I'm fine. I can eat bread. I'm okay. All right. I argue differently, because there's something called cerebellar ataxia. And this is something that gluten, this is one of the areas that gluten can affect the nervous system and the brain. And the cerebellum is our balance, right? And where we put together motions and movements. So, okay, so I'm like, well, let's humor me, would you please? Like, let's just try gluten-free for 6 weeks, right? See how you do. And his wife is like, I'm on with that. She's used to cooking for their daughters when they come over. So she was good with that. And that's really helpful, right? Because if you don't have a compatible partner, especially with the person who's cooking, it can be a bit of a challenge. But she knew all the details. She knew like the Worcestershire sauce. She knew the soy sauce. She knew, all of all of the packaged stuff. She was very familiar with all that. Her daughters had trained her quite well. And so in 6 weeks later, he comes walking in without his cane. And he's able to like carry on a conversation. He wasn't able to do that 6 weeks earlier. This is 6 weeks.
Wow.
He's walking in like that. And so I'm going, oh, good, good work. Keep up. Let's keep on this. Are you willing to keep on it? And he's like, yeah, I'll stay on it for a while. Okay, I'll see you in another 6 weeks, just to kind of check in, right? So he comes in another 6 weeks later, and he was pretty frustrated, and he was a little upset. And I'm like, what's up? And he wasn't really talking a whole lot. And his wife gives him the jab in the ribs, come on, you got, spill your guts, tell Dr. Laura. And he's like, oh, he goes, I was up on the CN Tower, which is like one of the tallest buildings in the world, right? Yeah. And I was doing the edge walk. Do you know what the edge walk is? Like, you're up, I don't know.
On the outside of the rim?
Yeah. He's up doing that. This is the guy that had to walk in with a cane that could hardly speak, 3 months earlier. He hadn't been able to do it. He's been wanting to do this for like 3 years. He'd been walking all around town with his company, their family that they'd had over, and he was up there, but he was a little worried that, he wasn't walking as well as he was. And I said, well, I think you might have just overdone it a little bit. What do you think? So it was like, yeah, okay. So, I mean, he wasn't able to go back to completely normal, but he was doing so much better than what he was. And then, over the course of time, he'd come back in, and if, a little sandwich had snuck in with some bread or something, he really noticed a difference. And I always say, if you hold like a white paper up, or I should say, if you hold like a paper up with a lot of writing on it, you can't see the black dot in it. But if you hold a white paper up and you only see the black dot, it's very easy to decipher. So when we take the gluten out completely for a period of time, and then it gets back in, whether inadvertently or on purpose, people really start to notice. And they're like, really? I only had like a couple of crackers and my joints and my knees started aching again. Can it really be that quick? And I'm like, yeah, try it again and see. And they'll be like, oh my goodness. But sometimes, they don't believe, and it's almost like a belief factor, but then when they do it, it's no longer just a belief, it's a knowing, and it's an experience. And oh my gosh, it can make such a world of difference. People with joint pain, brain fog, nausea, vomiting, GERD, the cerebellar ataxia was a little more rare. And then rashes on the skin, right? Not just the dermatitis or pataformis, which is like the little bubbly rash that's very specific, more for the celiacs. But like eczema and psoriasis, autoimmune conditions, it's kind of, it can, because it works on that gut and starts to disrupt things there. So, yeah.
And have you found that when you have fermented breads, because I've had patients who do not want to get off it no matter what, and my attitude is never through force. Let's see, let's test, let's, at least that's how I live my life, so I can't be in contradiction to that and tell them, no, you must get off, we make deals, but anyway. But I have seen that people who are gluten sensitive, if they have fermented breads, like as in sourdough, especially the old recipes where they do it for 48 hours, that they don't seem to react as much. And so I'm just wondering if that's just, I've been convinced by several people that that is actually their experience, or whether there is something to it.
I had a friend, she once told me, she goes, they moved into a new neighborhood, and she goes, you know what? There is this lady who has this sourdough bread recipe, and she says that even the celiac people can eat it. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. I wonder if there's something in the yeast, because she had like yeast, like a, like the mother, for fermenting for like 70 years. I'm like, oh, maybe it's our yeast. Maybe, maybe it's not the changes in the grain. Maybe our yeasts are just really lame and they don't do the same. And we need these ancient yeasts to help break down, the gluten so that it's better. But I mean, sourdough is still really stretchy, which, still has that factor because the gluten makes it so stretchy and so good.
Right.
So I have heard that. Personally, I'm a bit afraid to try it because I know what happens to me when I eat gluten. It's just not a pleasant experience, and I don't care to ever experience it if I don't have to, or intentionally again. But I've heard that the sprouted stuff, I'm not so sure. I'm not really convinced on that. But again, some people aren't as sensitive. Some people can get away with those things and be okay. It's a bit of a spectrum, right? And for some, and I always like to say, it's choice. We all make our choices, but let's observe what the choices do for us. And sometimes you do need to kind of clear the plate off, so to speak,
Right.
before you start adding it back in. So I would have them clear the plate off and then add it back in. For some people, that's too difficult. So then we do a little bit of a weaning off, right? So we work on what are we going to, how are we going to change the breakfast meal up? Because sometimes that's really tough for people. They're okay with doing veggies and rice or potatoes or, beans or whatever the rest of the day, and their whatever protein they're eating. But then the breakfast might be difficult or something like that. So then we just focus on, okay, what are the alternatives? So never trying to, I don't want people to feel like they're deprived. I felt deprived for so many years because, coming off, it's like, no, let's find other things that, can be alternatives. And if it's not close enough, then sometimes you just, find something totally different. Right. So, right. There are some good gluten-free breads out there, some made with coconut flour. If you're okay with rice, there's some with rice, arrowroot, almond, eggs, flax, chia. There's a number of different recipes out there. And when you haven't had gluten in a long time, you're thinking, yes, these taste just as good, but it does take a little bit, when you're used to that yummy taste of gluten, because there is something called gluteomorphins. For some of us, for some of us, gluten can act like an opioid in the brain, and actually we're addicted. And I don't know, I don't have the testing. There are tests you can run for this. I didn't do the testing for it, but I remember when I was kind of getting off the gluten and, I'd think, oh, this is okay. Or I'd ask, I remember being in a Chinese restaurant. I'm like, is the hot and sour soup gluten-free? And yeah, it's gluten-free, right? The lovely Chinese lady there, and you're trusting her, I'm trusting her. And then I'm like taking my sips and I'm going like, oh, this is so good. And my husband looks at me and he takes the bowl. He goes, don't eat it.
He could tell by your reaction.
It's just like light up, right? But it's true, like just like people can be addicted to sugar, you can also be addicted to gluten, and it's something with the gluteomorphins that produce these opioids, like substances in our brain. Yeah, so it can be really difficult for people to get off of it because it's addictive for some.
I have a funny story to share. I had patients who they were Italian, right? And and it looked like they really couldn't take gluten, and every time they tried, they reacted. And so they were like, fine, They ended up going to Italy. And I got an email from them saying, we are eating pizza, we're eating, all this stuff. And it's like, and they're fine. And I'm like, what did they do? What is different, So that's when I started reading books about, gluten a little bit more. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it's, and some of them are myths. So I don't know which one. I didn't go deep, Is it there's less gluten in certain, in certain wheats, like the way they grow them, the length or the height or whatever. And I can't remember which one's debunked or which one's not. Or is it because they're on holiday and they're back home and they're, eating moderately, but they're happy? It's like all these factors. Anyway, when they came back, they couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And it was like a period of 6 weeks, which is not nothing, where their reality was completely altered.
And I've heard that too. And you're right, like some of the talk is, we have modified in North America the wheat plant so that it does have more gluten, because this is the favored component. It's the stretchiness, it's the flavor, it's what it's doing as far as an additive. So yeah, so that could be part of it. But like you, I also think, are we just, relaxed and digesting better? Is that what it is? But we also know that there are, one of the key researchers for celiac and wheat sensitivity, I think it's Dr. Fasano, is Italian, and a lot of the research comes out of Italy for this. And Italy is now producing a lot of wheat and gluten-free products.
Exactly. Yeah, I know, which is kind of great, because they certainly know how to make it, the pizzazz in it so that it feels like you're getting something special and good, Anyway, I love food, so I love discussing all aspects of food, including some of the problems, and some of the things we don't know. We don't know why. So I love having the context of it, and continuing with the Inquisition.
And sometimes it's multifactored, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, so Dr. Laura, our time is up.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and, updating on what's actually happening with this whole gluten situation.
Excellent. My pleasure. Anytime, Manon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Manon Bolliger. Continue your healing journey by visiting thehealerscafe.com and her website, and discover how to listen to your body and reboot for optimal health.